What's going on, guys? Welcome to Danny Wright's Dragon Stories. In a world where dragons and humans unite, kindness becomes strength, and friendship creates legend. So let's dive into the story.
The smell of burnt metal reached Darrow Webb before anything else did. He was flat on his back under a busted cargo hauler, turning a wrench by feel alone, when something hit the landing bay floor with a screech of sparks and a sound like a bag of tools thrown down a staircase. He did not move right away. Loud arrivals were not rare out here. Ships limped into way station Faro all the time, leaking fuel, misfiring drives, held together with wire and bad decisions. He slid out from under the hauler. What had come through the bay entrance was not a ship. It was a personal grav bike, a Vreth-built flight, sled by the look of it, long and angular, with stabilizer fins along the rear and a split-coil engine that was now pouring thin gray smoke into the recycled station air. It had gouged a meter-long scratch across the floor before stopping. Sitting on top of it, very still, was a dragon, not a large one. She was maybe the size of a young calf, covered in dark green scales that caught the light like polished stone. Her wings were folded tight against her back. Her eyes, gold with narrow pupils, were fixed straight ahead at nothing in particular, the way a person looks when they are deciding how embarrassed to be Duro's assistant. Bino stepped out from behind a parched shelf and immediately started making a noise like a man who had forgotten how to speak. Darrow walked over to the grav bike. The damage was visible without even crouching. The resonance coil on the left side had cracked clean through. He could see the fracture from 2 meters away. The ignition relay housing had melted at one corner, fused shut. Someone had been pushing this engine very hard for a very long time, that he crouched anyway and looked closer. "You are not supposed to touch that," the dragon said. Her voice was low and clear, with an accent that clipped the ends of words short. Her translator collar, a thin silver band at her throat, pulsed faintly as she spoke. "I'm not touching anything," Darrow said. "I'm looking. I did not ask for your help. You didn't ask for a lot of things. Doesn't change what happened." He stood and wiped his hands on his work cloth out of habit, even though he hadn't touched anything yet. Cracked resonance coil, fused ignition relay. You ride it like that much longer, and the whole left drive collapses. The dragon turned her head and looked at him directly for the first time. It was the kind of look that was probably meant to be intimidating. Darrow had been looked at by bigger things than her. "I am aware of the condition of my vehicle," she said. "Good. Then you know it needs to be fixed before you go anywhere on it." He glanced back at Bino, who was still standing frozen near the shelf. "Bino, stop staring. Give me the coil diagnostic kit." Bino moved, but he leaned in close as he passed and whispered, loud enough to be heard across the bay, "Darrow, that is a Vreth. That is a dragon noble. You cannot just coil diagnostic kit," Darrow said again, same tone as before. Bino went and got it. The dragon watched all of this. She had not moved from the wrecked bike. Her tail flicked once across the floor, slow and deliberate. "What is your name, Groundwalker?" she asked. "Darrow Webb. I run this dock." He picked up the kit and moved toward the bike. "Yours." A pause. "Sable." Just the one name. He didn't push. People out here gave as much as they wanted to give that he began running the diagnostic wand along the engine housing. The reader beeped twice, confirming the coil fracture, then beeped a third time he hadn't expected. He moved the wand back, checked it again. There it was. A microfracture in the left flight frame, just forward of the main strut. Small, easy to miss. Not easy to ignore once he knew it was there. He straightened up and looked at Sable. "You knew about the frame crack, didn't you?" Her eyes did not move. "It was not severe. It's not severe yet." He set the wand down on top of the kit. "I've got the part for the coil and the relay. Frame repair takes longer, but I can do it. The whole job is an overnight if I start now." Sable looked at the bike, then at him, then at the bay around them. The worn floor, the stacked parts, the old hauler half dismantled against the far wall. It was not an impressive place. He knew that. "What are you charging?" she asked. He told her. She said nothing for a moment. Then she climbed off the bike with more grace than the situation probably deserved and stepped aside. "Begin," she said. Darrow pulled his tool cart over and got to work. Bino hovered nearby, handing him things when asked, shooting nervous glances at Sable every few seconds. She had settled herself on a flat cargo crate near the wall and sat there watching, still and quiet, like she had nowhere else to be. Maybe she didn't. Darrow didn't ask. He just worked. The base smelled like burnt coil and machine oil, and the faint recycled air, nothing smell of deep space stations everywhere. Somewhere above them, the station turned slowly in the dark. Outside, nothing moved. Just stars and silence, and the long, empty lanes between them. For now, that was fine. 2 hours into the repair, Sable spoke. Not to ask a question, not to complain. She just said, without looking up from the crate she was sitting on, "You are routing the coil feed backwards." Darrow stopped. He looked at what he was doing. He looked at it again. She was right that IT was a small thing. The feed line could run either way on most human-built machines, so the habit was automatic. On a Vreth resonance coil, the directional flow mattered. If he had finished it that way, and she had fired the engine up, the coil would have worked for about 3 minutes before burning out again. But he reversed the connection without a word and kept going that a minute passed. "You know your machine," he said. "It is my machine," Sable said, as if that explained everything. Maybe for her it did. "A lot of people own things they don't understand," Darrow said. He was reaching into the engine cavity now, fingers finding the fused relay housing by touch. "Bino, 12mm release key." Bino handed it over immediately. He had stopped staring at Sable about an hour ago and settled into the familiar rhythm of dock work. Hand things, hold things, stay out of the way. "Vreth build their own vehicles," Sable said. "Or they used to. The old craft lines." She paused. "My cycle was built by my mother's engineer. Not a factory model." That explained the quality of the frame. Even cracked, it had held together far longer than a standard production sled would have. Darrow had noticed that. He filed it away. "Why were you pushing it so hard?" he asked, silence that he didn't push. He worked the relay housing free. It took some effort. The heat had really fused the edges and set it aside to cool before he tried to replace it. "I had a distance to cover," Sable said finally. "Most people just plan for fuel stops. I did not want stops." She shifted on the crate, her tail curling close. "Stops mean people see you. Ask questions." Darrow glanced over his shoulder. She was looking at the floor, not at him. Her scales had gone slightly darker across the ridge of her neck. He didn't know Vreth physiology well enough to know what that meant exactly, but it looked like the way a person looks when they have said more than they meant to. He turned back to the engine. "Well," he said, "you stop now." "The machine stopped," she said. "That is different, is it?" She did not answer that. The relay replacement took another 40 minutes. It was careful work. The housing connections on Vreth engines were smaller than anything Darrow usually worked with, and he had to swap to fine-work gloves and a narrow head driver. Bino watched with the focused attention of someone learning something. The boy was good that way. He paid attention. When Darrow finally seated the new relay and heard it click into place cleanly, he let out a slow breath. "Test the coil feed," Bino asked. "Not yet. I want to do the frame repair first. No point testing the engine if the frame is going to crack further when we move it." He stepped back and looked at the underside of the sled. The microfracture ran about 9 centimeters along the inner strut. It had not spread since she came in, good sign, but it was in a stress position. Every hard burn she had done on the way here had been flexing that crack wider by fractions. "That frame crack," he said, not turning around. "How long have you known about it?" A pause. "Since 2 days before I left." "And you left anyway." "I had reasons." Darrow crouched under the sled and started setting up the frame repair rig. "I'm not judging. I'm just making sure I know the full picture before I fix it. If there's stress damage further along the strut I can't see, I need to check for it." He heard her get up from the crate. Her footsteps were quiet, lighter than he expected for an animal her size. And then she was crouching beside him, looking at the same thing he was looking at up close. She was more interesting than she was intimidating. The scales along her jaw had a faint iridescent edge, blue-black when the light caught them right. Her hands, forelimbs, technically, but she used them like hands, were long-fingered and precise-looking. "There," she said, pointing. About 4 centimeters past where he had been looking, the strut had a faint discoloration. Not a crack. Pre-crack stress. The metal had been worked. He would have found it. Probably. But she found it faster. Good eye, he said. She looked at him sideways. You were going to find it. Yes. But you would have thanked me anyway. Yes. Something changed in her expression. He could not read it perfectly. She was not human, but it looked a little like someone deciding something. She sat back down on the crate. He got to work on the frame. Outside the bay doors, the station lights had shifted to their low amber night cycle. The hauler Darrow had been working on before all this was still sitting half fixed against the wall, patient the way machines always were. It would wait. Everything waited when there was real work to do. Bino fell asleep in his chair around the third hour of the night cycle. He had tried to stay awake. He made himself a cup of something hot from the station dispenser and sat with it, watching Darrow work, occasionally asking questions that got slower and less coherent as the hours passed. Eventually his head dropped. The cup was set aside, and quiet took over the bay. Darrow didn't mind. The boy worked hard. He'd earned it. Sable had not slept. She sat on her crate in the amber half-dark, and somewhere around the time Bino's breathing went slow and even, she spoke again. Why are you out here? She asked. Not hostile, just curious, the way a person gets when the night gets long enough to make questions feel easier. Darrow was working on the strut reinforce, laying down a molecular well bead along the frame crack. He kept his eyes on the work. Out where? The station, the edge, the border runs. Human space goes further inward, more populated, more resources. She tilted her head. A mechanic with your skill would earn more closer to the center. He thought about that for a second. It was not a wrong observation. I like it quiet, he said, and there's always something broken out here. People forget about the edge stations. Ships come in with problems nobody's bothered to fix properly for years. He moved the weld tool slowly along the line. I like problems nobody's bothered to fix. Sable was quiet for a moment. In the Vreth Empire, a craftsperson with your ability would be assigned to a noble house. Given a title, a workshop with a staff. Assigned, Darrow said. Yes. Not hired. Not chosen. Assigned. She paused. It is an honor. I'm sure it is. He finished the well bead and leaned back to check the line. Clean. Even. Good. I work for myself. I go home when I want. Nobody tells me which ships to fix or how fast. He set the tool down. That's worth more to me than a title. Sable seemed to turn this over. The concept was not new to her. She had clearly dealt with humans before, had a translator collar, knew the language. But there was something in the way she looked at him that said she had heard the words without quite landing on what they meant yet. You belong to no house, she said. No fleet. No government contract. Nope. And this is by choice. All of it, Darrow said. She was silent long enough that he glanced over. She was looking at Bino's sleeping shape, then back at Darrow. He is your assistant, she said. Not your property. He's a free person who takes my coin and can leave any time he likes. He's been here 3 years. Because he wants to be, far as I can tell. Sable looked down at her hands. That is strange to me, she said quietly. Not wrong. Just strange. Darrow stood and stretched his back, which had been making complaints for the last hour. Your turn, he said. You said you didn't want stops. Didn't want people to see you. Where were you going that needed that kind of secrecy? Her scales did the darkening thing again, the colors shift across her neck and shoulders. I was trying to cross the border run alone, she said. The full outer loop. Without an escort. Darrow waited. I am third in succession to my house, she said, and her voice was flat, like she was reading from a document she didn't fully like. I have never been permitted to travel without guards, without a fleet shadow, without someone watching every move. She looked at him. I want to know if I could, if I was capable, on my own. And were you? Darrow asked at a long silence. I made it 70% of the route before the machine gave out. That's not nothing, Darrow said. She looked at him like she expected him to say something else. Something about how she should have been more careful, or how it was foolish, or how she was lucky to have found this dock. He didn't say any of that. He picked up the next tool and got back to work. She was quiet after that, but it was a different kind of quiet. Less guarded. She watched him work with her full attention. Not suspicious, not bored. Just watching, the way someone watches a thing they've decided they find genuinely interesting. Around the deep middle of the night, he finished the frame repair and moved back to the engine for the coil testing sequence. He ran it 3 times. Clean all 3. The ignition relay seated perfectly. The feed lines ran true. He stood up and looked at the bike. It's done, he said. Sable stood immediately, walked over, and ran her hand along the repaired frame. Slow, careful. Her fingers found the weld line and traced it. You matched the original metal grade, she said. Not a question. I had a close enough stock. Filed it down to match the weight distribution. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the frame. Then she said, quiet enough that he almost missed it. You are good at what you do. Darrow started putting his tools away. So are you. You knew every part of that engine better than most owners know their own names. She made a sound he couldn't quite translate, but it sounded like something good. Bino slept on. The station turned. The grav bike sat in the dock, repaired and ready, waiting for morning. Darrow was writing the invoice when the alarms went off, not the dock alarms. The station-wide alarms, the deep resonant ones built into the walls that Darrow had heard exactly twice in 11 years on Pharaoh, both times for navigation buoy failures, never for anything real. They made the floor hum. He set down the invoice pad. Sable, who had been standing near the grab bike doing a final check of her own, went completely still. The bay doors banged open a second later, and Chief Alya came through them at a speed that did not suit a man of his age or his administrative rank. His face had gone the particular gray color it went when something had moved far outside his ability to manage. Darrow, he said, and his voice was a controlled fall. Darrow, there are ships. There are always ships, Alya. 17 of them. Alya stopped walking because his legs seemed to stop working. Vreth warships. They came out of FTL about 6 minutes ago, and they're surrounding the station, and they are not moving, and they're not answering my hail. And Darrow, I need you to— What exactly? Darrow said. Do you want a mechanic to do about 17 warships? Alya opened his mouth. Closed it. Bino, who had woken up with the alarms and was now standing at the dock's secondary console, turned around slowly. He looked at Sable. He looked at Darrow. He looked back at Sable. Oh, Bino said. Sable had not moved. She was standing beside the grav bike with her wings pressed flat against her back and her jaw set and her eyes fixed at a point somewhere past the far wall. The color had drained from the scales around her neck, not darker this time. Lighter, almost pale. Darrow looked at her for a moment. They're looking for you. He said that IT was not a question. Sable breathed in slowly through her nose. Yes. You didn't tell your fleet where you were going. No. And now they've tracked the bike's last transponder ping to this station. A very small pause. The transponder was supposed to be switched off. It switches back on automatically when the engine drops below 10% function, Darrow said. Safety feature. It's in the manual. The silence that followed that particular sentence had a very specific quality to it. Bino made a sound that was almost a laugh and managed to turn it into a cough. Alya was still standing near the door, looking from one of them to the other, understanding only that none of this was going to end well for his blood pressure. The station comm crackled. A voice came through, deep, with the clipped cadence of a fleet officer who had never once in their life needed to ask twice. Way Station Pharaoh. This is the Vreth Royal Fleet, flagship unmarked. You will open your main bay and permit a boarding party within the next 10 minutes. Non-compliance will be noted. A pause. We are looking for someone. We mean no harm to your station or its crew, provided cooperation is immediate. The comm clicked off. Alya looked at Darrow. We have to let them in. Obviously, Darrow said. They're going to come in here with armed soldiers, and yes. And that is a Vreth Royal. Alya pointed at Sable, arm shaking slightly. That is a Vreth Royal who has been in my station overnight, and I didn't file a— Alya. Darrow picked up the invoice pad again and held it out towards Sable. Your paperwork is current. She came in as a private traveler with a broken vehicle. Everything about that is true. You didn't file anything wrong. He looked at Sable. Right? Sable looked at the invoice pad. Then she reached into a pouch at her side and produced a payment chip, pressed it to the pad with a firm click, and held it there until the light turned green. Full amount. Plus a number on top that Darrow did not argue with. She handed the pad back. Then she reached out her right hand, fingers spread, palms slightly turned. The human handshake posture done carefully like she had thought about how to do it correctly. Darrow shook her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. Her scales were smoother than he had expected. "Whatever happens in the next few minutes," she said, "you fixed my machine fairly and treated me like a person and asked for nothing extra." Her gold eyes were steady. "I will not forget that." "Don't mention it," Darrow said. "I will, actually," she said. "Quite a lot. To several important people." Then she straightened up to her full height, folded her hands behind her back, and turned to face the bay entrance. She was still small, as Vreth went. But standing like that, chin lifted, wings settled just so, she did not look small at all. She looked like someone who had decided exactly who they were and was not apologizing for any of it. Darrow stepped back to his workbench. Bino quietly moved to stand beside him. Alya stayed near the door because his legs still weren't quite working. The main bay began to open. The Admiral walked like someone who had never once considered that anything in a room might be more important than her. She was large, larger than Sable by a full third, with scales the deep color of old iron and a ridge of plates across her brow that had the look of something that had survived a long time by being very hard. Her armor was not ceremonial. It had been used. The 4 soldiers behind her were bigger than anyone on the station, and they moved the way trained soldiers move, not threatening exactly, but filling the space in a way that made the space feel smaller. Alya had pressed himself against the wall near the door. He was breathing, but barely contributing to the conversation. The Admiral stepped into the dock and stopped. She looked at Sable first. A long look, top to bottom and back up, the kind of look that was checking for damage before it was doing anything else. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy the first question. The lines around her eyes eased, just slightly. Then she looked at the grav bike. Then at Darrow. "You," she said. "You repaired it." "That's my job," Darrow said. The Admiral moved toward the bike in the slow way that large, confident things move when they're not in a hurry. She walked around it once. Her eyes moved across the weld line, the new relay housing, the replaced coil. One of her soldiers, who had the look of an engineer carrying a scanner at his belt, stepped forward and ran a check without being told to. Darrow waited. The soldier looked at the Admiral. "Sound," he said. "The frame repair matches original material grade. Coil installation is correct. Relay is properly seated." A short pause. "It is better than the factory spec in 2 places." The Admiral turned to look at Darrow again. "You did this overnight." "Started yesterday afternoon," Darrow said. "Alone. My assistant helped with tools. The hands-on work was mine." The Admiral was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is your name?" "Darrow Webb." "Darrow Webb." She said it the way people say a name when they're deciding whether to remember it. "You repaired a Vreth royal vehicle. Without being asked. Without being contracted. Without knowing or caring who owned it." Bino, standing at Darrow's left, opened his mouth. Darrow spoke first. "I knew who she was," Darrow said. "Bino told me about 20 minutes after she came in." He nodded toward his assistant. "I fix broken things. The bike was broken. That's all." The Admiral looked at Bino, who achieved a remarkable stillness. She looked back at Darrow. "You knew she was Vreth nobility, and you charged her a standard rate." "I charge her a fair rate," Darrow said. "Standard would have been low for the work involved." Something moved in the Admiral's face. It was subtle, a shift around the jaw, a brief light in the old gold eyes, and then it was gone. "What do you want?" she asked. "Name it." "Service contract with the fleet. A letter of distinction for your station. A trade berth." "Your ships are pointing weapons at my station," Darrow said. "I'd like that to stop." Silence. Alya made a faint sound from his wall. The Admiral looked at Darrow for a long moment. Then she turned her head and said one word to the soldier nearest her. The soldier touched his comm through the bay's external feed. Darrow could see the little screen on the secondary console where Bino had been sitting. The warship formation, which had been sitting in a tight encirclement pattern around Pharaoh since the morning, began to pull back. Slowly, then further, into a loose, standard orbit. Not gone, but no longer surrounding. "Done," the Admiral said. She looked at Darrow with something he couldn't quite name. "You are not afraid of me." "I don't know you well enough to be afraid of you," Darrow said. "You haven't done anything to me. My fleet surrounded your station. Your fleet surrounded my station, looking for someone you were worried about. That's different from hostile." He picked up a rag from the bench and wiped his hands, more for something to do than because they were dirty. I'd probably do the same if someone I was responsible for went missing. The Admiral stared at him. Behind her, Sable was watching the whole thing with an expression that Darrow had learned to read a little over the course of the night. She looked like someone watching a thing they expected to go badly, slowly realizing it was going to go fine. The Admiral turned to her soldiers and said something in Vreth, too fast for the translator collar to catch, and the soldiers stepped back toward the entrance. Then she turned back and looked at the dock, at the half-finished hauler against the wall, at the tool cart, at the scuffed floor and the amber station lights, and the invoice pad sitting on the workbench. "This is a small place," she said, not unkindly. "Yes," Darrow said. "You could work anywhere." "I know." She seemed to accept that. She turned to go, then stopped. "Darrow Webb," she said without turning back. "This species of yours. I have dealt with humans for 40 years. A pause. "They always surprise me," Bino whispered. "Was that a compliment?" "Don't push it," Darrow said quietly. The Admiral's soldiers filed out. She followed, unhurried as she had entered. Sable lingered. She looked at Darrow one more time, and he looked back. Tomorrow felt like it was going to be a completely different kind of day. The fleet left in the early afternoon, not all at once. First, the smaller ships peeled away, one by one, jumping to FTL in those brief white flashes that lit up the station's exterior cameras like slow photographs. Then the mid-size escorts. Then the flagship. Last of all, their 1 second, and then simply not there, leaving nothing behind but the faint shimmer of displaced space that faded in seconds. Bino stood at the external feed console and watched until the shimmer was gone. "Right?" he said, to no one in particular. Alya had gone home 4 hours ago to lie down. He had not said much after the Admiral left. Just walked out of the dock with the careful steps of a man who was done with the day and planned to be done with several more days in sequence. Darrow was back under the cargo hauler. The strip bolt he had been working on yesterday, before the smells and the sparks and the small green dragon, was still stripped. It had not fixed itself overnight. He had not expected it to. He got back to work. He was there for about an hour when he heard Bino say, "Oh." Darrow slid out from under the hauler. Bino was standing near the workbench, looking at something on it. Darrow walked over. There was a tool on the bench that had not been there before. It was a Vreth instrument, a precision driver of some kind, built for fine detail work, size for fingers longer than human ones, but still usable. The handle was worn smooth in the grip points, the metal darkened with age and use. It was not new. It was not something you bought. It was the kind of thing you carried for years until it became part of how you worked. Darrow picked it up and turned it over. There was no note. "Sable?" Bino asked. "Had to be," Darrow said. "When did she, before she boarded the shuttle?" "She came back through the dock." Darrow thought about it. He had heard footsteps while he was cleaning up after the Admiral's departure. Had assumed it was Alya. "I didn't see her. Maybe she didn't want you to," Bino said. Darrow looked at the tool for another moment. Then he opened his personal toolbox, the old one, the one he had carried from his first dock job to his second to every station since, and set the Vreth driver inside it. Carefully, in its own slot, between a weld pick he'd had for 9 years and a multi-head driver his father had given him. Bino watched this. "Are you going to tell me what that means?" "Leaving a personal tool." "I don't know exactly," Darrow said, "but it's not nothing." He closed the toolbox. 3 weeks passed. They were ordinary weeks. A fuel hauler came in with a cracked intake manifold. A trader's NAV computer needed a full wipe and reinstall. Bino got better at frame welding. Alya recovered enough to be annoying again, which Darrow took as a sign that things were back to normal. On the 23rd day after the fleet left, a single Vreth courier ship came through to IT did not request docking. It dropped out of FTL long enough to release a cargo pod on a slow approach to the station, then jumped away before Darrow had even made it to the external comm. The pod was clean and sealed and roughly the size of a small car. It had no label, no sender name, no documentation of any kind. Darrow and Bino stood in the bay and looked at it. "Should we open it?" Bino asked. "It came to our dock," Darrow said. "Doesn't seem like a threat." "Could be a threat. Vreth couriers don't drop weapons pods on border stations. They could just shoot." Darrow went and got the seal breaker. "It's something else." He was right. The pod was packed with Vreth manufacture components. Parts Darrow had been trying to source for years. Vreth alloy stock that he could use for frame repairs but could never get out here on the edge. Precision relay housings in 6 sizes. A full set of fine work drivers sized for human hands. Coil material of a grade he had only ever seen listed in supplier catalogs as out of stock for outer region stations. There was one small flat card at the top. Not a letter, just a symbol, a Vreth craftsperson's mark, the kind that went on finished work as a signature. Bino looked it up on his reader. He was quiet for a second. That's her house mark, he said. Darrow picked up one of the relay housings and looked at it. Perfect. Better than anything he'd been working with. Should we send it back? Bino asked. Darrow was already moving toward the storage shelves, relay housing in hand. No, he said that he had fixed a broken bike. He had done the work in front of him because it was the work in front of him, and he had charged a fair price, and he had not made a large thing out of a small thing. That was all, but sometimes the small things were not small at all. Sometimes fixing the right thing, in the right way at the right moment, sent something forward into the world that kept moving long after the wrench was put down. Darrow shelved the relay housing and went back for another armful. Outside, the station turned. The edge lanes stretched away into the dark, and somewhere far across the border, a small green dragon was back on the road. This time, probably with a full escort, but she'd made it 70% of the way alone, and she knew every part of her own engine. That counted for something.